This is CBC Vancouver News.
I want transparency and accountability, and I want Burt Westervelt to stand trial.
New details on an Okanagan woman's death, why her family is still seeking justice 7 years later.
Anybody that said 2 words to him saw his heart was just as big as he was.
Homeless but not forgotten. A Burnaby community remembers Calvin Bear Grothson.
So this was a priority for us to open up library services again and let people know that there's different ways of using the library.
And nature's playground turns into a library. How storytime is playing out on a BC ski hill. Good evening, I'm Lien Yeung. Thanks for joining us. A police disciplinary report is shedding light on the death of a woman who died on Okanagan Lake 7 years ago. Arlene Westervelt's husband was accused of second-degree murder, but the charges were later stayed. A report from the Office of the Police Complaints Commissioner now shows the case involves a former high-ranking BC RCMP officer who was a friend to the family. And our Janella Hamilton joins us in studio now with the details. So, Janella, what's the latest in this case?
A police complaints adjudicator has ruled former RCMP officer Sergeant Brian Gately will face a written reprimand instead of a one-day suspension for his conduct during the investigation into the death of Arlene Westervelt. Westervelt was 56 years old when she died in June of 2016 during a day of canoeing and picnicking at Okanagan Lake with her husband, Lambertus Westervelt, who goes by Bert. Arlene's body was eventually found underwater about 100 feet from shore. It was initially believed that her death was an accident, but 3 years later, Lake Country RCMP charged Arlene's husband with second-degree murder. He maintained his innocence, and in 2020, the charges were stayed. This new report notes that was because of an issue with the pathologist's report. Arlene's sister, Debbie Hennig, who we can see in this photo with Arlene, has been calling for justice for her sister and believes the investigation was mishandled.
If this evidence came to trial and exposed all this bungling and cover-ups, that would be disastrous for public confidence in police and the justice system.
So, Janella, we've heard Debbie Hennig make these comments before to media speaking out. In fact, it's what led to the disciplinary action that we're seeing and hearing about today. What more do we know from this report from the OPCC?
According to the report, Gately's wife worked with Arlene as a nurse, and the two families would socialize several times per year. After her death, Arlene's husband, Bert, reached out to Sergeant Gately, asking for help retrieving photos from Arlene's locked phone for her funeral. At the time, her death was deemed accidental. During those interactions, Bert confessed to Gately about being untruthful with the RCMP about his wife's death. The OPCC says that Gately immediately took Bert's statement and contacted investigators. However, charges were later dropped. The reason is still unclear. Arlene's family publicly accused Gately of being involved in a cover-up that led to the Crown staying the charge. To clear his name, Gately wrote a letter to Arlene's sister saying how shocked he was when the charges were dropped against Bert and that he believed it was not related to the cell phone. His superiors had advised him not to speak out. The report reads, although Gately has admitted to the discreditable conduct, the evidence in the record suggests that he did not deliberately contact a witness in a homicide investigation in contravention of direct orders from his superiors. CBC News reached out to Debbie, Arlene's sister. She does not believe Gately or the RCMP are being truthful about the investigation. She has filed a civil lawsuit against Gately that remains before the courts.
If the RCMP believes that a letter in a personal file makes up for this disgraceful breach of trust, then my impression and the RCMP's impression of what justice is very different. I want a public inquiry. I want transparency and accountability. And I want Burt Westervelt to stand trial.
The coroner service did reopen the investigation last spring, but they did not give us any updates into the case. Leanne?
All right, thank you so much for that, Janella. Janella Hamilton reporting for us tonight. A man in his 20s has been charged after a fatal stabbing in Mission last month. 27-year-old Matthew Bauer of Chilliwack has been charged with second-degree murder. In mid-December, police were called to a home on 4th Avenue near Mary Street for a report of a stabbing. There they found 64-year-old Holbert Tew. He died on scene. Investigators have not yet determined a motive. Dozens of people gathered at a Burnaby park this morning to remember Calvin Bear Gertson. The 56-year-old man who was homeless died in December while being arrested by police. BC civilian-led police watchdog is investigating. But today, community members stood in the rain to share stories and remember a friend. Our Saurabh Sandhu was there.
Drums beat in unison in memory of Calvin Gertson as community members gather around this tree where the man who was homeless spent a lot of his time. Harinder Parmar met Gertson for the first time sitting outside this Shoppers Drug Mart at a strip mall.
He would say hello, so, he'd say hello, so he just became like just somebody that you saw there and said hi to on your way in and out.
RCMP say Gertson went into medical distress while being apprehended at a Starbucks in the complex on December 16th. First responders tried to revive him, but he was pronounced dead at the scene. This outreach worker says he shared many conversations with Gertson.
He was very recluse at first, but then as soon as the community, even me and the community started talking to him, he really started opening up, and you got to see the beauty in him and the passion and the love inside him.
Anybody that said 2 words to him saw his heart was just as big as he was, and he just shared love with everybody that he met.
Born in Manitoba, Gertson moved to the Lower Mainland last year. His estranged sister tells CBC her brother suffered from alcoholism. People here rallied around him despite his struggles.
A lot of pain and trauma, and he, did say he had ADHD and he was bipolar, that he said that he always struggled to manage his money.
Even though that it was a little rocky, his relationship with his parents, he valued family and friendship above anything else.
The Independent Investigations Office is looking at whether police action or inaction were linked to the man's death. Parmar hopes people remember Gertson as a kind-hearted man who had a positive impact on the community.
If somebody maybe reads a news report, they're going to think, oh, it's another example of maybe why people should not trust somebody who is not housed, that they're unpredictable or they're violent, and that is not true.
Saurabh Sandhu, CBC News, Burnaby.
With some help from a mediator, paramedics and the province have reached a tentative deal. Both sides say no details exactly yet on the deal as it's being ratified, but in a statement, the union that represents 4,500 paramedic dispatchers says it's been the toughest time in 50 years. Between the pandemic and poison drug crisis, there is tremendous pressure. Reaching the agreement was, quote, a giant step towards providing the appropriate level of care to our patients across BC. Paramedics' last collective agreement expired on April of last year. In Surrey last night, family and friends said goodbye to a young woman killed in the horrific bus crash Christmas Eve. Kathy Kimberley was among 4 people killed when a coach bus overturned between Kelowna and Merritt. Our Liam Britton was there to hear from the family, who are still seeking answers.
Here at a Surrey funeral home, emotional family and friends are saying goodbye to a loved one gone far too soon. Kathy Lee and 3 others died after a bus flipped on Highway 97C on Christmas Eve. Road conditions that night were treacherous. She was traveling home to Aldergrove for the holidays. The last time Kathy's boyfriend Alexander Vaz spoke to her was less than an hour before the crash.
She was wearing I had a blue sweater that I gave her, and she was wearing that, and she was eating chocolate, and she spilled some chocolate on the sweater. So she was just texting me saying, sorry, I got some chocolate on your sweater, and saying, all right, it's all right. And, that's the last thing I sent.
At her service, emotion, memories, and anguish that more memories could not be made. Compounding their hurt, family says, is a lack of direct communication with eBus, the coach operator. Most of all, the family wants answers.
If the bus drivers already know the weather condition is no good, why would he continue the journey that day, on that day?
eBus has not responded to CBC's request for comments. They have issued a statement expressing condolences. Now, Mounties are investigating, but they warn it could be many months before they decide whether to recommend charges. Liam Britton, CBC News, Surrey.
The latest outbreak of avian flu shows no signs of slowing down. Birds on 2 Vancouver Island properties have now tested positive in Port Alberni and Tofino.
It has been recorded a positive case of avian influenza in a non-commercial small flock poultry. So it's safe to say we're talking about a backyard chicken.
Currently, more than 3.5 million birds are infected in BC alone. So officials are warning bird farmers to monitor their birds, test regularly, and avoid overcrowding, which can prevent the spread. If you think your birds may be sick, officials say to call the province's wild bird mortality reporting line. Well, it may sound like a flight of fancy, but for prison guards in the Fraser Valley, it was all too real. For the first time in recent memory, a pigeon was busted with drugs inside a BC correctional facility. Rihanna Schmunk has more on the attempted airborne delivery.
Pigeons, big city birds, war heroes, and occasional drug smugglers.
It's a curveball for sure.
Staff busted a pigeon carrying a little package in one of the yards at Pacific Institution in Abbotsford last December.
It was noticed by staff because it was odd to see a bird with something tied to it. From my understanding, though, it was tied to it in a similar fashion as like a little backpack.
After a good amount of time, corrections officers caught the pigeon. It had about 30 grams of crystal meth.
It's definitely scary with the fact that it was crystal meth that was found on the bird because, you know, that causes a whole lot of problems.
Pigeons have been used to smuggle drugs for nearly a century. But it's rare in BC.
That's the first time in my career I've ever heard or seen that for sure. I guess it's a bit of a reality check for us that the creativity that people are going to use to try and smuggle drugs and other contraband into the institution is multifaceted.
Homing pigeons are known for their ability to navigate long distances in order to fly back home to their home lofts. And they can carry about 15% of their body weight. A few dozen ounces doesn't sound like much, but the 30 grams on this bird would be worth at least a few $1,000s. And in theory, experts say it would be possible for an inmate to train a pigeon to recognize a prison as its home loft. Someone else could then come take the bird away, load up its cargo, and release it to fly back home to the prison. But that work could take months. Correctional Services Canada is investigating, but wouldn't provide further details. The pigeon in question was released back to the street. Rihanna Schmunk, CBC News, Vancouver.
Protesters gathered in Victoria and across the country today to call for the cancellation of Ottawa's plans to purchase 16 F-35 fighter jets for $7 billion.
The billions of dollars that these jets will cost should be used for human needs, for education, to address the climate emergency, to address the toxic drug emergency.
The Department of National Defense received approval on the purchase before Christmas and has yet to release a formal announcement, giving activists hope it might still be dropped. Well, beloved East Vancouver neighborhood restaurant Dock Lunch has served its last meal after a temporary closure for renovations was extended permanently.
I love inviting people into my space and hosting and talking to them and serving them and getting to know them and telling my story and telling their story as well. That's all I know how to do now.
Brian, a home cook, started by selling sandwiches out of her front window before officially opening the restaurant in 2012 there. Dock Lunch was known for its simple home-cooked Southern-style comfort food and eclectic decor. But recent plans for expansion will not accommodate food service.
Well, the customers and the staff have always been the best part of this business. They're my people. They're like me. They think outside the box. They're flexible. They're funny. They like things that are a little rough around the edges, and they embrace chaos like I do, which is how they ended up here.
Brian plans to live with family in Victoria while she cooks up plans for her next culinary adventure. A collaborative skiing and storytelling project in Kimberley aims to get kids moving and reading. As CBC's Corey Bullock reports, the new ski story program at the Kimberley Nordic Club is encouraging literacy and activity through the story of the Gruffalo.
Every day, Kootenai kids head outside to play. It's a common occurrence to see families on the slopes on the weekend, but a new program at the Kimberley Nordic Club combines skiing with a story.
Terrible teeth in his terrible jaws.
The Nordic Club and Kimberley Public Library have come together to present an interactive storytelling of the popular children's book, The Gruffalo. And what do you think about combining a ski with a story?
I love it.
The two organizations hope to encourage a combination of physical activity and literacy within their youngest user groups.
Being physical in the world allows us to engage in all that all the senses provide, and we then are curious about what the world is and what's going on out there. So I think the combination of physical activity allows sort of that curiosity to then reinforce reading.
The Gruffalo is told across 12 boards stationed along a popular 2-kilometer cross-country ski trail.
You know, the mandate of the library is to promote our services and promote literacy in fun and engaging ways, and often that comes outside of the traditional walls of the library. And
it's a unique project they hope will have a lasting impact.
Kids won't necessarily know that they're learning and reading, and then they're just out to have a good time.
It's also seen as a way to get children out and engaging in the community.
Pandemic was really difficult and very isolating for lots of people, including families. So this was a priority for us to open up library services again and let people know that there's different ways of using the library.
And what better way to get kids outside to play than with a ski and a story. Corey Bullock, CBC News, Cranbrook.
Well, it's that time of year to bid your Christmas tree goodbye. There she goes. The annual Christmas tree chipping is underway this weekend in New Westminster. The event is a drive-through tree chipping by donation. The city's arborists chip the trees and use the mulch for grounds.
It's a fundraiser for the New Westminster Firefighters Charitable Society. We've been doing this for almost 20 years now. The money is getting raised to go back into our city. People can come by, bring their trees, and make a donation.
They also conducted a Christmas tree burn demonstration to highlight the dangers of letting your tree dry out. You can now include more plastic products in your blue bins. The province's recycling program is expanding. The increase, which came into effect yesterday, means you can now put plastic cups, plates, and bowls, cutlery, straws, and even food containers, aluminum foil as well, in your bins. Drop-off recycling depots will also now accept plastic sandwich and freezer bags, shrink wrap, as well as plastic carry-out bags. You can see a list of detailed items now being accepted and where on recyclebc.ca/new items. China's Spring Festival travel rush will see millions of people crisscrossing the country, and it's happening amid a COVID wave. We'll bring you that story next. China's annual spring travel season begins today. As we lead up to the Lunar New Year, millions of people will be crisscrossing the country amid a COVID wave observers suspect is already overwhelming. Richard Kimber reports.
China's health authorities are continuing to downplay the risk of a massive COVID outbreak in the country as a result of what's expected to be a huge migration of people over the next few weeks in the run-up to the Lunar New Year holidays. China's Ministry of Transport said that it expects there to be a combined total of 2 billion trips taken in the country as so many people go from big cities back to the countryside to visit their family. This is a massive tradition in China that has not been possible for the last 3 years because of the country's strict COVID-19 measures. And so for many people, it may be the first time in some 3 years they've been able to go back to their hometown and spend time with their families. Some Chinese citizens have said they're reluctant to do that this year, even though the rules have been relaxed because of concerns over the COVID outbreak in the country. China's health authorities are continuing to downplay that risk, though. They say that everything is under control and that the COVID situation in the country is predictable and manageable. They say that they are upping capacity at rural hospitals in intensive care units, and that they've asked some staff who have recently retired in rural areas to come back to work in hospitals to cope with what may be an increased demand.
介绍了中国新冠疫情防控举措。
China is also dismissing concern and criticism from the World Health Organization over the way that it's reporting data about the COVID outbreak in the country. It says that such suggestions are unreasonable and unfounded. The overall sense then from China's authorities is that they want to move on quickly from these strict periods of lockdowns and COVID controls to one in which the economy is allowed to open up again and life is effectively allowed to get back to normal. But there is continued concern internationally and domestically about whether or not the health authorities have enough measures in place to cope with what has already been seen to be a surge in coronavirus cases and understood to be a surge in fatalities. Richard Kimber for CBC News in Hong Kong.
Kevin McCarthy has been elected as the U.S. House Speaker after 15 grueling rounds of voting. It was the longest deadlock over the job since just before the Civil War.
That was easy, huh?
His election was delayed by what began as a group of about 20 holdouts, most of them concerned McCarthy isn't conservative enough. Iran has executed 2 more people in connection with the ongoing anti-government protests. The 2 men were convicted of killing a security militia member. There are accusations both were tortured into confessing. The U.S., Britain, France, and the European Union have condemned the hangings and are demanding the execution stop. Rights group Amnesty International says 26 more death sentences are pending. And there's your live shot of BC Place and the Georgia Viaduct on a bit of a wet night. There's going to be more rain ahead. I'll have your full forecast coming up after the break. Let's take a look at that weather forecast now. A soggy one, and it's going to stay the same for the rest of the week. But there are your current temperatures. It is warmer than average. So average high around this time of year is about 5 degrees. So looking pretty good. Here's your forecast for the rest of the province tomorrow. Looking at a -9 in Dease Lake. Yeah, pretty warm even over up north there. Prince Rupert looking at 5 degrees, and Prince George just at the freezing mark, so you may see a risk of flurries. Williams Lake 4 degrees, looking at some rainfall. Kelowna, you might see some rain snow mix at 2 degrees, and in Victoria 9 degrees will be the high tomorrow. And here's our forecast for the rest of the week here in Metro Vancouver. 8s across the board. Tuesday appears to be your only fully dry day for this week. The rest of it will be a pretty wet one, so make sure you hang on to your umbrellas and wellies for a little while longer yet. After the summer drought and all of that snow, I'm happy with that rain. All right, that's it for us this Saturday night. Thank you so much for watching. I will be back here tomorrow. Have a good evening and Happy New Year. My first time on air since 2023. Have a good one.